Okie dokie, Smokey. I'm going to go ahead and do this live because it's easier. I recorded something else, but overall, when I look back on it, I was like, this is pretty much retread crap. And I've retreaded a lot of stuff, but I feel like this is somewhat more original. Now, I heard before is that basically the United States is like the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. I cannot think of the person who commented that. I'm so sorry. I'm not doing it to be an asshole. But anywho, they said that, yeah, America is like the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. And it's just going to slowly but surely come down. I think that's true. Whether it's the medal count for the Olympics compared to China, whether it's whichever metric you want to use, the U.S. is going down. But they're going to claw themselves, and they're just going to hold on as long as they can. Hello, the Shock Reyes. How are you? They're going to claw themselves up and continue to hold on. Now, my question is this. Would China be more like the Roman Empire? What do I mean by that? The Roman Empire in the sense that, generally speaking, as far as we know, I'm sure people are going to say, well, the Roman Empire wasn't like that. Generally speaking, the Roman Empire allowed countries to pretty much keep their own. I'm doing all right. It's a day off, so that's why I'm streaming in the middle of the day. So I'm just vibing. Probably later tonight when it's cooler, I'm gonna get some groceries. But yeah, that's about it. What's going on, Mad Baron? Should we watch this? You know what? Let's go ahead and screw it. Okay. Should we go ahead and watch this video by Keith Woods? He just uploaded this today. Just like how long ago? At least according to my feed. Let me see here. 10 minutes ago, he uploaded this video. Press 1 if y'all want me to watch it. Press 2 if you want me to watch something else. Or if you want me to just rant and rave. Either way. Yeah, just to make sure. Press 1 if you want to watch the Keith Woods video. And we can see what he says. Because he's referring to a book by A. James Gregor. Another one. Okay. Yeah, he's referring to a book by A. James Gregor. If you look at that book, it is about $100. Oh, it's $90. The cheapest one for this book. A Place in the Sun, Marxism and Fascism in China's Long Revolution. This is basically how, after the death of Mao, China became... Okay, I'm getting ones in the chat. No problem. Let me hook up my old Bluetooth here, and let's get it going. Let me see here. I don't think they'll... There we go. I think it did. Okay, beep, beep. All right, I'll go ahead and put in my other one. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and just share the screen. There we go. There we go. I don't think there's anything too bad on here. There we go. Let's go ahead and watch it. Why not? We'll go ahead and start at the beginning. Hide that. There we go.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, there was something of a backlash to my last video where I talked to Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson, who made the quite controversial claim that China is no longer a Marxist or communist state, that it's...
See, the thing is, there's a couple, like I say, great minds think alike, and generally speaking, there's only a few folks really trying to talk about this in a pragmatic way. I saw Zoltanus talking with the Kiwis. I believe it's Kiwis, the New Zealanders, or one of the two New Zealand guys. And they're talking about how China is detrimental to New Zealand. There's a lot of folks who go back and forth, and I think they didn't specifically mention Keith Woods, but they did mention this what's this guy's name? Sorry.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, there was something of a backlash to my last video where I talked to Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson.
Yeah, Matthew Raphael Johnson is the guy that they are referring to. Like I say, I take it with a grain of salt, but yeah, let's go ahead and continue.
Made the quite controversial claim that China is no longer a Marxist or communist state, that it's totally deviated from Marxist thought since the death of Mao, and now represents a state that is a representative of nationalist socialism or even fascism. So given the controversy this created, I thought it might be worthwhile to examine this question a bit more carefully. Now, there's no shortage of scholars and writers in the West who have claimed that China has long since deviated from communism and more accurately represents fascism than anything else. For example, in a quite influential article that was published in the American Enterprise Institute, Michael Ledeen wrote that, quote, classical fascism should be the starting point for our efforts to understand the People's Republic of China. Imagine Italy 50 years after the fascist revolution. Mussolini would be dead and buried, the corporate state would be largely intact, the party would be firmly in control, and Italy would be governed by professional politicians. Now, it's hard to take neocons like Michael Ledeen seriously on this issue when they portray all of their enemies as fascists or Islamofascists or something similar. So I thought it would be worthwhile to go to the foremost scholar on 20th century fascism and an expert on dictatorships, the academic A. James Gregor, who has written a number of books on this topic. And of specific interest was a book he wrote called A Place in the Sun, Marxism and...
By the way, if you look this book up, I did have this on my wish list, but then I purged my list on Amazon. This book is like $90 on the cheap end. So I'd say if you can find the PDF, hold on. I think there is a PDF of it, but yeah, just to say.
And fascism in China's long revolution. Now, in this book, Gregor makes a clear case that China...
So I know, I do want to say this. I'm going to give my comments here, but I know Zoltanus was saying is that China is a country that kind of, took in aspects of Schmidt, the friend-enemy distinction. Also is more of a Confucian state that, has kind of, they want to destroy liberalism, but they still want to maintain some aspects of like capitalism to a point. Like I said, it's hard to kind of fully identify China as one thing. Like I say, there are folks I'm sure like Has that will say, "Oh, China's still socialist. It's on the road to it." I don't think it is, because like I say, China doesn't even have socialized medicine, much less anything else. The thing is that in general, I think that China is simply rediscovering the power that it always has after the century of humiliation. But I think that fundamentally, there are some things that will always exist in China that I think people are just kind of accepting of in general, the Chinese people, such as the lack of, healthcare, a lack of a decent, retirement system, such as in the United States. That's not even me being like being a pro-burger nationalism type thing. I'm just saying that is the reality of China, So that's why you'll have filial piety. You'll have, if you marry a Chinese woman, chances are you marry her whole family, right? So the family moves in, hey, how much money you have, this and that sort of thing, because they take care of their family. It's much more old school, not just because they've had so many revolutions and everything else like that, and the systems weren't there, but it's also just the reality of things of you have to take care of your family. It's kind of the filial piety sort of way. Yeah. That's a code for fascists that don't have power, in my opinion. They wouldn't govern a civilization like the CCP does. Yeah. Once Mao died, Mao supporters were dealt with China, ceased to be Marxist, thank God, yeah. Would you say that they're going back to Qing dynasty-like politics? Like I said, the Qing dynasty is a mixed bag, I think, generally speaking. I think with the Qing dynasty, you had some reach out to the West, and obviously you had folks like, you had some Catholics who did get involved with China, this and that, but I feel like it's a different sort of thing. So I think it's somewhere in between. I think it depends on who you talk to, but yeah, I think it's somewhat in there, but not quite.
After the death of Mao and the emergence of Deng Xiaoping, Mao's successor, became what would be characterized as a fascist state. Now, I realize at this point a lot of people will laugh, dismiss this video, or start to write angry comments. It may well seem surprising to see Gregor use fascism of all terms to describe a self-professed communist state like China, but it's important to understand Gregor's definition of fascism against the popular understanding, which is basically just a synonym for right-wing authoritarianism. According to Gregor, there is a phenomenon of what he calls reactive developmental nationalism, which emerges when a nation sees the need to forge ahead economically in order to assert its national identity and find its place in the sun. There you have the title of this book. And when the progress towards this place in the sun seems stymied by some foreign catastrophe or national embarrassment, think of the Treaty of Versailles. In the case of China, think of how right now China is building its comeback on the so-called century of shame, which the Chinese had undergone prior to the rule of the CCP, which is when China suffered multiple defeats and subjugations to the powers of Japan and the West prior to the Second World War. Now, the result of this is a reactive authoritarianism, an attempt to develop the nation from the top down. Gregor sees both Marxism-Leninism and fascism from the 20th century as the progeny of this process. And fascism specifically is what Gregor calls a variant of Sorelian syndicalism, which also included elements of national idealism and elitist socialism. Gregor actually says that fascism was the socialism of proletarian nations. So with that in mind, let's look specifically at what he said about post-Maoist China. He wrote that, quote, "Post-Maoist China is clearly a member of a class of reactive and developmental regimes with which the 20th century has become familiar. Mussolini's fascism was a member of a subset of that class. The China of Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin, which is Deng's successor, appears to be nothing less. It is a variant of contemporary fascism. And also, contemporary China gives every appearance of being the kind of anti-liberal, collectivist, party-dominant, elitist, militaristic, plebiscitary, reactive nationalist and developmental fascist system with which the 20th century has become familiar." So given that there seems to be this common thread of identifying a sharp break with the emergence of Deng Xiaoping and the rule of Mao Zedong from communism to nationalism, it seems worthwhile to look more closely at the emergence of this figure, Deng Xiaoping. Now, Deng served in a number of positions under Mao Zedong, but he was considered one of the more reform-minded members of the party. Mao feared that the right-wing politics of Deng could lead to the restoration of capitalism and ultimately the end of the Chinese Revolution. For this and other reasons, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution in 1966, during which Deng fell out of favor and was forced to retire from all his offices. And with his family, he was exiled to the rural Jiangxi province to undergo re-education.
Yeah.
In one instance,
what has to be said about the Cultural Revolution, in my very limited assumption, is that primarily the Cultural Revolution, at least in the early days, was aimed more at Liu Shaoqi. Now, of course, Liu Shaoqi was much more confrontational directly with Mao Zedong. And of course, there's all sorts of stories, and I'm not going to sit here and give credence to any of those, but just to say that it was more focused on that. And then it became something else because it obviously went on for 10 years. So, take it for what it is. I'm just saying.
Instance, during this violent cultural revolution, he was browbeat by Red Guard students who forced him to kneel.
I will say this, is that Keith Woods has used James Gregor before. He had another book. I'm trying to think of the name of it. I know I have that one on the shelves, but yeah. There's pseudo third positionists. Yeah. But these are European terms, might not capture what China actually is. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why people like Zoltanus, to a point, will say it's Confucianist. And I probably have more respect for that because obviously that's what it is. It comes from Confucian, or Confucius, coming more from Kongfuzi, which is the actual term of Confucius in Chinese, is Kongfuzi. So that's why there's some folks who are named Kong, and they can trace their lineage back to Confucius, or Kongfuzi. I believe that's how it is. Anyway, I think that's what it is. I could be wrong.
As his family watched, and he confessed to capitalist ways of thinking. The Red Guards also imprisoned Deng's son, Deng Pufang, and they tortured him and threw him out of the window of a 4-story building, causing him to become a paraplegic. Eventually, however, the Chinese premier at the time, Zhou Enlai, saw the need for reform and reinstated Deng and made him his vice premier. But he was again exiled by the so-called Gang of Four after Enlai's death. The Gang of Four was a group of extreme ideological leftists led by Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, who became highly influential in governing the direction of China during the Cultural Revolution. After Mao's death in 1976, the Gang of Four was slated to continue Mao's revolutionary leftism as his ideological successors. But they were in fact purged by Mao's appointed successor, Hua Guofeng, and Deng once again made a political comeback. This marked a turning point where moderate, reform-minded nationalists in the party leadership began to purge the more leftist elements. By carefully mobilizing his supporters within the Chinese Communist Party, Deng was able to outmaneuver Hua Guofeng himself, and then oust him from the top leadership positions by 1980. By encouraging public criticism of the Cultural Revolution, Deng weakened the position of those who owed their political positions to that event, while he strengthened the positions of people like himself who had been purged during that time.
I agree.
Deng also took the rather radical move of repudiating the Cultural Revolution and allowing the open criticism of the excesses and suffering that occurred during that period. He was also the impetus for the abolition of the class background system. Under that system, the CCP put up employment barriers to the Chinese deemed to be associated with the former landlord class. The removal of this system allowed Chinese capitalists to join the Communist Party for the first time. Deng insisted, without qualification, on the primacy of economic development. Prior to the death of Mao, the insistence suggested to Maoists a revisionist neglect of the class struggle, and that's what led to the long-held suspicion around Deng held by more ideological members of the party. On Deng taking power, many Marxist intellectuals and members of the party despaired, considering him a proponent of capitalism. For example, the Western Marxist intellectual Charles Bettelheim warned that the direction in which Deng sought to guide China could only result in the, quote, restoration of capitalism and transform the Chinese Communist Party into a counter-revolutionary fascist party. Gregor writes that, quote, whatever Deng's pragmatic accommodation to the increasing leftism of Maoism throughout the 60s and early 1970s, in the judgment of contemporary sinologists, he nonetheless remained, throughout his career, a staunch nationalist. By the mid-1980s, Deng had started to define socialism in terms that he admitted had never been used by the founders of Marxist-Leninism. It was defined in what Deng acknowledged were what he called heretical terms. Speaking on the Maoist ideology in the Chinese leadership, Gregor writes that, quote, upon his advent to power, Deng Xiaoping was to reject all of that in its entirety. He was to reject its rationale, its economic strategies, and its political postures. In doing that, Deng was to renounce almost the entire legacy of Mao. That legacy was identified and deplored as leftist, and leftism was charged with obstructing the economic growth and industrial development of the nation. Maoists had systematically opposed any simple emphasis on the rapid development of the nation's productive forces. Deng's thought is remembered by the phrase, it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice.
Yeah, I've heard this phrase a few times. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these things here, which I don't think need to be said. The thing is that you have the Great Leap Forward. You have the Great Leap Forward in China, where basically priceless heirlooms and other things were melted down, as far as I know, to make pig iron. Now, I mean, people question this a lot of what in the world was the purpose of that. Maybe I'm getting it mixed up, but I think that, you know, you had the Great Leap Forward and all this sort of thing to try to get China, you know, moving and everything else like that. Now, people I'm sure will question, okay, well, what did China do? You know, I mean, the thing is that there's a real question of how effective was Mao Zedong in his rule. I mean, like I say, I'm not going to sit here and be pro-Maoist or anti-Maoist or anything else like that. I think it just I can say this now from having been separated for a while, obviously in time. I think, China just wasn't as able to embrace the rest of the world yet. I think in certain ways. So, like, for example, I mean, we look at the Soviet Union, we look at Stalin, right? Say what you will about Stalin, but he was willing to work with Henry Ford. And a lot of MLs, I'm sure, will be like, well, yeah, he needed to do that. I've heard, and I've heard Jason Unruh as well, where it's like, well, yeah, he did what he had to do, so that they could, so that they could make things work, right? Only Orientalists complain about artifacts being destroyed over human lives being saved by them. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair, Temujin. Yeah. I'll go ahead and back up off that point. What I was going to say, though, about the Soviet Union is, he worked with, is that Stalin worked with Henry Ford to help build the Gorky automotive factory. And, the Gaz factory in Nizhny Novgorod, which at the time was called Gorky. That's why it was, it was the name of the factory. You had, even the famous T-34 had the Christie suspension, which, came from an American inventor, I believe. This isn't even me. Yeah, it was not a dinner party. No, exactly, it wasn't. And like I say, the Soviet Union did what they had to do in a pragmatic way. Whereas China at that time was trying to get rid of the three olds, getting rid of more traditionalist attitudes, maybe the Confucian ways and everything else like that. But it kind of, it left a lot of things bare. And like I said, this is where people question where Maoism is, this and that. And I think that there were people who just thought it went too far. And yeah, that's fine. Yeah, like I say, we're not gonna sit there and get into that. But yeah, help Nana, Mustache Man, and Stalin. Yeah, Fortis, Nospo, Kingwin. Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is that Fred Koch, the Koch brothers' father, worked with both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as well to help get their oil production off the ground. So, like I say, there are plenty of folks that went back and forth, but it was what it was, right? There's an element of pragmatism that does exist. Doesn't matter what the political party is, or whatever ideology you have. You can't be some complete ideologue. It's just like, yeah, business gonna business. Exactly. It's that simple. Like I say, I'm trying to be very careful about saying that, but ultimately I think China just said, okay, let's work with the United States and let's work with the rest of the world and let's see what we can get. That's my opinion post Mao. But yeah, let's continue.
Signaling a move away from the rigid commitment to Marxist ideology in favor of a more pragmatic, consequentialist approach to governing. Deng was to introduce a constellation of non-Maoist and fundamentally non-Marxist economic policies. The reintroduction of elements of American economy into what had been for years a command economy. Deng restored free markets for the exchange of a substantial proportion of producer and consumer goods and allowed the employment of property for personal profit. He also opened the Chinese economy to capital and technology transfers from the advanced industrial economies, and allowed the solicitation of joint venture investments from foreigners.
I do want to show for a moment this guy Asianometry, which makes great videos talking about Chinese companies that were very fledgling in the 1970s and 1980s and are now huge companies that are producing, screens for Apple's iPhone and everything else like that. I want to say like ASL, this and that, but there are other Chinese companies that have, really come out of the gate and made a lot of great gains. But yeah, that's just the reality, is that this is part of the cope of a lot of Americans in general, where it's stuff like China stole our technology. No, you willingly sold it. It's like you willingly sold stuff there because you wanted to make more money. It takes two to tango. It takes two to tango. You can blame China, whatever the case may be, for saying, "Oh, well, they've excelled." The thing is, though, is that the reality is that American capitalists and South Korean capitalists and just capitalists in general willingly, and I'll be more specific, and companies who had proprietary rights willingly sold it to China. They willingly did this, and the Chinese were able to adapt. What do you know? It's just the same thing with Japan, right? Japan was able to excel because Americans came in and they were able to get things going, and you have, I can't think of his name, Ono, and you get the whole idea of just-in-time production and all that sort of thing. This is just the way it goes. If you introduce these types of things, of course they're going to do better. This whole cope about, China copies everything. It's like, I take that with a huge grain of salt, but that's just me. Yeah, that's my opinion too. Yeah. You got to be able to blame both sides, I don't know. Sometimes I think I come off more as a bootlicker for China. It's like, look, China is what it is, and they are going to be the new power. They are. It's just how is that going to look, and how are you going to deal with it? That's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. Yeah. That's my opinion, anyway.
And the creation of conditions that allowed important sectors of the domestic Chinese economy to be export-oriented, true to apparently long-held convictions. For Deng, it was the development of the productive forces that determines the merits of any political system, and, in his judgment, it is political stability, party dominance, and ideological conformity that create the environment in which growth and technological development take place. Although Deng's rule was characterized by a liberalizing of the economy, he never allowed the political liberalization that had come at the end of the Soviet Union. Instead, the rule of the party was maintained as sacrosanct.
Yeah.
Reform.
This is an important point, because we obviously see Jack Ma, who disappeared for months, and people weren't sure where he went, and then he suddenly comes out. It's like, I was wrong about what I said, this and that. And you see a move of China stepping away from more of the Alibaba type stuff and the, make apps and stuff like that, for more pragmatic, like actual nuts and bolts type stuff, instead of just fun stuff for consumers. Now we're going to do actual nuts and bolts production. That's what China is shifting to. And, and of course, like I say, China still has the power to get rid of billionaires. This is part of the reason why I've even heard this from the skeptical MLs and whatnot that have, someone become quote unquote Maoists, who are just like, because China got rid of capitalists, and they kill off big billionaires and whatnot. Actually, they're like the Nazis. I've heard this. I remember there was that one guy who was talking with the Irishman. Or Paul Moran, that's it. Yeah, he was talking with that Paul Moran guy and saying, "Oh, look at what China's done, this and that." Oh, and it's just like, how are you really think a bunch of Maoist LARPers are going to overthrow one of the largest economies in the world? Get the hell out of here. Like I say, that's my take on it.
Reform was to come from a corporatist system with different interests represented within the party, rather than a move to a pluralism of competing interests vying for political power. This was to be combined with the cult of personality around the party leader, and the entire system was to require what he called the ritualized charisma of a paramount leader dominating a single party state. Gregor wrote that
this is why I think people get confused in general, where they think, oh, well, this is why China is that way, because they reformed economically, but they didn't reform politically. So it's kind of like the Nazis, because they did privatization, but then they still had control and whatnot, So I think that's kind of the misnomer. Like I say, you can't really, that's apples to oranges in general, in my opinion. You could talk about, I mean, you could talk about BASF and, about what they did and all the synthetic rubber and everything else that was produced in countries. And like I say, the Chinese still haven't used slave labor like the Nazis did. So like I say, I'm very cautious. But yeah, let's continue.
Maoist China has clearly traversed the distance between Marxism-Leninism and the
Yeah.
presumably right-wing developmental nationalism that have come to typify revolution in the 20th century. The abandonment of Marxism-Leninism, Mao Zedong taught, has been all but absolute. But if
See, now he's being very careful. I like that. With it, presumably that's from A. James Gregor. He realizes that there's this pitiful separation between Marxist Leninist Maoism, or being principally MLM, versus being, someone who supports Mao Zedong thought. To me, I thought the distinction was always retarded. I'm just going to be frank with you. I think it's retarded, the difference between Marxist-Leninist Maoism versus Mao Zedong thought. It's like, we like everything. Basically, as far as I know, the separation is we like everything that Mao Zedong wrote about in like the 1930s and 40s, and like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but we didn't like what he actually did in China. But Mao Zedong thought is, yeah, he pretty much did some good things when he was actually in power. As far as I know, that's the separation, where it's like, so ultimately it's based on what somebody wrote about, and you like what he wrote about and didn't actually do. Like I say, that's the dumbest distinction to me, but yeah. Some people confuse China and Taiwan. Yeah.
China's economic model is not communist, how best would we describe it? Well, China is following a corporatist economic model. Corporatism is an economic model that was adopted by fascist movements in Europe in the early 20th century. We've also seen it in democratic contexts like many European countries, such as Austria and the Scandinavian countries after the Second World War, and even Britain for a period prior to Margaret Thatcher. Alan Cawson, the author of Corporatism and Political Theory, defines corporatism as, quote, a socio-political process in which organizations representing monopolistic functional interests engage in political exchange with state agencies over public policy outputs, which involves these organizations in a role that combines interest representation and policy implementation through delegated self-enforcement.
That's that's literally word salad. I'm sorry. That's bordering on word salad. I mean, I think that it's very oversimplified. I think very oversimplified. I don't know. Yeah.
Corporatism, the state recognizes one association or corporation as a representative of one sector's interests. For example, a manufacturing corporation, an artisans corporation, etc. This kind of corporation often gets confused with the modern kind of corporation, but it's better understood as a guild, and guild socialism was actually an early forerunner to corporatism itself. Now, under the Chinese corporatist model, the state oversees and maintains functional relationships between these organizations representing various sectors of Chinese society, and in turn, these organizations and groups must adhere to the rules and regulations established by the state. In The Century of Chinese Corporatism, published in American Affairs, the author writes that, quote, all told, since 1949, China has tried a large number of successful and not so successful corporatist experiments. What these phases have in common is a state corporatist or top-down approach, albeit with shifting degrees of state involvement, and in the present era, a snail's pace effort to build towards a societal corporatism, which is a more bottom-up model of corporatism. Since the early 1990s, Deng declared an explicit policy around state-owned enterprises of grasping the large and letting the small go. Meaning the Chinese state would maintain control of large, strategically important enterprises, while a considerable degree of free activity and competition would be permitted in other areas where central direction is less necessary or efficient. The kind of enterprises kept under the direction of the state in a so-called commanding heights model include things like natural resources like oil, coal and minerals, telecommunications, shipping, and aviation. China is home to 109 corporations listed on the Fortune Global 500, but only 15%
Oh man, 109, really? Oh boy, here we go.
of these are actually privately owned. The state also props up manufacturing by subsidizing a range of goods which favor the manufacturing sector, such as energy, and uses profits generated by successful state-owned companies to subsidize the less successful. So although China has entered the global markets and is very much playing the game of capitalism, the very big enterprises are owned by the state, so there is not the risk of the state becoming captured by the capitalist elite as there is in the West. And this is also the case with banking. China does have banks, but none of these are really privately owned. In their banking system, there's the so-called Big Four banks that are all completely government owned. These are China Construction Bank, Agricultural Bank of China, ICBC, and then Bank of Communications. Then there are banks which are labeled private. They're owned by shareholders, but all of these banks have minority private shares. The majority of shares are owned by 100% government entities or by private entities, which in turn also have government entities controlling the majority of their shares. So there isn't really a private banking sector in China as such. All of this is subject to the direction of the state. Now, for the ideological Marxists who insist that China is still staying true to Maoism and pursuing a global worldwide liberation of the proletariat and is still a Marxist-Leninist state, there's also the problem of the apparent racial nationalism of the current Chinese state. A. James Gregor made this very claim, saying that since Deng, China has subtly embraced...
I know Bay Area 415. I don't follow him anymore because I think he's just... I just think he's a LARPer as well. But I know that they've said this as well, is that, even it's written in the Chinese constitution that they don't promote Han supremacy. It's amazing to me that they, in the same breath that they would say, the U.S. Constitution is bullshit, it's based on white supremacy. But then in the same breath will be like, well, China doesn't promote Han supremacy. It's just like, come on, of course they do. It is what it is, right? But yeah. He deleted his channel. Oh shit. What happened? Did someone dox him? What happened? Well, let me know when you can, Jake English. I was like, wow, okay. That's too bad for Bay Area 415. I feel sorry for my guess on that, but he was kind of a LARPer. And anyway, when you get a chance.
The kind of racial nationalism. Quote, by the early 1990s, the intellectuals of the People's Republic of China, receiving government sanction, had chosen to identify Chinese nationality with the continuities of blood and race rather than culture. However much the official spokespersons of Beijing avoid reference to biology and race, it has become evident that the contemporary nationalism of Communist China has strong racial overtones. Since the mid-1980s, for example, the cult of the Yellow Emperor, Huang Di, has been officially endorsed by the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. All Chinese, it is currently maintained, are proud descendants.
Well, hold on. Huang Di just means emperor, as far as I know. It doesn't necessarily mean, like I say, I don't know, but let's be careful about those. You had Qin Shi Huang Di, if that's what go ahead.
The Yellow Emperor. And we can occasionally see contemporary examples of this way of thinking coming from senior figures in the CCP. For example, Ismail Ahmad, who was head of the China State Ethnic Affairs Committee, stated that, in contrast to sentimental attachment to the state, nationalism is more a matter of blood ties and race. And to people that think that China is just a kind of civic nationalist state, well, PRC nationality law actually relies upon notions of race through what it calls the principle of blood lineage. Now, there are some interesting papers that look at attitudes to racial relations among the elite in China. One paper called Ethnic Relations in the PRC that was published in 1994 says that, quote, most Chinese intellectuals rate the country's major ethnic groups in descending order from Han to Tibetan. Internationally, they rank peoples from yellow and white at the top, with brown peoples, Arabs, Asians, Indians, far behind, and Africans at the extreme rear. According to the paper, comments made by the survey respondents are just as disparaging as those made by intellectuals a century ago. These and other studies show that Han chauvinism did not dissipate under the CCP, and post-Mao racialized thought has had a resurgence, as was also evidenced by outbreaks of anti-black racism and race riots in the 1980s. Another paper called Racial...
Well, I'll go ahead and relate to what he says here, is that in the late 1970s, this is after Mao Zedong's death, there were African students who were allowed to go to a Chinese university. And the Chinese men who were going to this same university didn't like that the Africans were messing with their women, so they beat them up. I mean, it's pretty simple as far, it's nothing new really, but this is something that has been mentioned. Another aspect I think that has to be mentioned as well is that you have to speak Mandarin. That's not to say that they're going to execute you or whatever the case may be if you speak a different language, but in general, in mainland China, you have to learn Mandarin, and you have to learn, writing in Chinese, even if it's simplified. So, yeah, like I said, I'm being very careful here, but let's continue.
Racial nationalism and China's external behavior from 1997 also looked at this phenomenon and looked more deeply at how this was being used to craft a national identity. In the words of this paper, quote, "The effort to build racial nationalism is nevertheless deepening. In developing it, the regime has moved beyond state-centered patriotism to a racialized version of nation-centered patriotism. Thus, there is no reason to conclude that the propagation of the idea of a biologically based national cohesiveness and racial hierarchy by PRC elites is merely a trick to the poor and the powerless. It is more likely a closely held tenet of elites who continue to pay formal obeisance or deferential respect to the now otiose or redundant principles of the ruling party because the latter is the best vehicle for their nationalist sentiments." On this topic specifically, Gregor writes that, quote, "The search for a biological foundation for the nation, what Western commentators call a myth of descent, seems to typify reactive..."
So what I'll say with this is, what he's kind of talking about is this wolf. I'm trying to think of the movie. It was one with Jackie Wu Jing. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie offhand. Wolf Warrior, something like that. Let me see here. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie because I know it's fairly big. Oh, he's 47, huh? Wolf Warrior. Yeah, it is Wolf Warrior. Okay, yeah. The sort of Wolf Warrior mindset where allegedly, I think it was the first movie where China, they're going to try to get rid of the Han race or something like that. That biologically, they're going to try to get rid of it. But yeah, I mean, Jackie Wu Jing, as he's known, worked with, like I said, Lau Ka-leung, worked with Yuen Wo-ping. So a lot of the Hong Kong movies he was trained at the Beijing Wushu Academy, same place as Jet Li. So kind of an interesting thing, but yeah, I'm kind of going off topic, but yeah. So there is that racial aspect that does happen in China, but yeah.
And developmental nationalism in the 20th century, and has come to characterize the reactive nationalism of post-Maoist China. The left-wing posturing of Mao Zedong, together with all the pretenses of Marxism-Leninism, have all been swept away in the frank reactive nationalism and the biological anthropologisms of Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin. Also notable to those that believe that China has...
Yeah, we know the Carl Schmitt thing. I do have a book on it. I take that with a grain of salt, but let's continue.
The third position, beyond capitalism or Marxist communism, is the resurgence of academic and party interests in the German jurist and illiberal philosopher Carl Schmitt. Specifically, since the emergence of Xi Jinping as the leader of China, there has been what's called Schmitt fever, where Chinese scholars now are rushing out articles on the work of Carl Schmitt and high-ranking members of the CCP are seeking to ground the new ideology of China in the thought of Schmidt rather than more standard Marxist thinkers. In an article published in The Atlantic, the author wrote of how, quote, Schmidt gives pro-Beijing scholars an opportunity to anchor the party's legitimacy on more primal forces, nationalism and external enemies, rather than the time-worn notion of class struggle. It marks a move from what had been an illiberal government in Beijing, one that flouts liberal norms as a matter of convenience, to an anti-liberal government, one that repudiates liberal norms as a matter of principle. So when we look at China, we find an illiberal, anti-democratic, one-party, absolutist state, a state which, since the death of Mao and the purge of his would-be successors, has made absolute pragmatism in service of the nation its guiding principle, and embraced the third way of a corporatist economic model which allows markets and innovation tempered by the direction set by the party on the basis of the national interest. Party leaders themselves have abandoned a commitment to Marxism-Leninism and embraced what they call socialism with Chinese characteristics. Of course, it is important to acknowledge that China's internal and external messaging still has a lot of Marxist themes. No doubt many of them will be presented to me as counter evidence of the argument made in this video, and the CCP still conceives of itself as liberators of the national and international proletariat. According to the CCP, Marxist thought has evolved in a dialectic, built upon by Lenin and later by Mao and later Chinese rulers.
Yeah, sure.
There's no doubt they maintain a declared fealty to Marxism. And this is where the ambiguity comes in, and it's easy to see why China can be seen by some as capitalist, some as Marxist, by Gregor and others as fascist. Aesthetically, and in their moral framing, they do remain true to their Marxist origins. But in practice, they have become something else. And arguably, in its form, their current model is closer to fascism than anything else, which can be acknowledged once we rid ourselves of Marxist myths of fascism being a right-wing dictatorship or a sign of capitalism in decay, and recognize Gregor's more sober academic understanding of fascism as proletarian nationalism, embracing economic syndicalism or corporatism, and elitist socialism. Although China has embraced elements of capitalism, its capitalist class still remains subservient to the state, and the state has shown itself willing to punish and remove billionaires who step out of line. It has also allowed a banking sector to develop while making sure it is strictly controlled. And
I mean, this is similar with the DPRK. The DPRK embraced Juche, which means self-reliance. It can mean a lot of different things, but primarily it means self-reliance. It also can be a form of Korean nationalism, for Korea to unite as one nation again, and to provide, a resurgence of, traditional Korean culture. So, like I say, it's all very, it's just pragmatism, in my opinion.
Directed by the state. Unlike the West, where only the losses of bankers are socialized while the profits remain private. Whatever China is, we can't exactly call it communist or capitalist. To give the last word again to A. James Gregor, quote, the charismatic and anti-democratic dispositions of Deng Xiaoping's China, combined with the entire syndrome of traits with which we are now familiar, render it an approximation of classical fascism.
Yeah, it's a little oversimplified. Okay, that sounds good.
Search politically provoked, and we should pop right up. We are
okay. Why is this thought still on here? I don't get it, BM.
Neutral ground where people from across the political spectrum can either duke it out in a debate or.
I do debates. I do.
I honestly don't want to talk about this guy that much. I think I'm going to say unsubscribe from him. I think in general, he's going to continue to be more of a lib. He calls himself a liberal hawk. Kevin does. I think a lot of what his whole beef now is because of this imaginary, this whole beef that he had with his audience, people like Kanzuk and everything else like that. It's just pitiful internet bullshit. And now he's like, I don't like conservatives. I respect gay rights and everything else like that. But then we'll ignore the fact that, pretty much in general, the gay community is 8 times more likely to have drug abuse and alcohol abuse problems. And he has said that he doesn't like the use of drugs, this and that. So, like I say, man, I think that he's trying to be more mainstream, I think, and he's trying to be more respectful. But I think, he'll still kind of promote this kind of, I don't like Muslims, but Arabs can be saved sort of thing. Yeah. It's funny to me where this whole Free Natalie stuff is that Natalie, this Natalie Avalon character is a monarchist. But of course, they're still atheistic. I don't really get that. It's like most monarchies were Catholic. So I don't know. It's very strange the way they destroyed, they defend this stuff. Yeah. Would you say that Kim Il-sung was the only true Juche and that his son and grandson have failed to carry on Kim Il-sung's legacy? I don't know about all that. Wolin and Julie. I've seen some of that. I think in general what they try to promote is it's okay, but I think that Julie in particular is an evolving character. I think that he's somebody that has definitely stepped away from the whole accelerationist gang. He's kind of stepped away from a lot of that because he realizes just how LARPy it is, and he's getting older. And I think that he's trying to find a place in academia. So I think in general, I think that he's eventually probably going to step away from that defense of, sort of fascist imperialism. I think that he's stepping away from that. So basically my thing is, he's going to change his mind on that. So I don't know. But yeah, let's continue with this.
To news, politics, mostly focused.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to let this roll. I got to get the dog off the bed. Hold on.
On foreign policy, international relations, and security issues, although I've been branching out more to talk about economics and social issues as well. So the bulk of my focus throughout the course of my channel over about the last 980 videos roughly has been foreign policy focused with an emphasis on Western security interests and humanitarianism. Additionally, as far as my political convictions are concerned, I roughly would identify socially liberal or socially left, economically right or economically liberal in the classic sense. And then as far as it relates to foreign policy, I'm a liberal hawk / unilateralist. I used to call myself a liberal neoconservative, but I've become a bit more comfortable with the liberal unilateralist label. So I'm a very hawkish.
He doesn't talk about Prussianism the same way. Siege Chart Maoism. Hold on. Mad Baron, is this the video from Zoltanus? Is that the video? Because if I think that is, I've already seen it. It's all right, but yeah. It's only 10 seconds. Yeah, sure. We can go ahead and check it. Why not? Let's see what we got here. I gotta mute it, don't I? Sorry. It's sued my light, everybody. Let's see what we got here. Whoops. Actually, it wouldn't have mattered. I'll go ahead and do that. Give me the link. There's the link. Get ready to mute. There we go. Okay. Oh, it's a shit post. Okay.
Out of my way, Pen. You just stay out of my way.
You just watch your step, McGurk. Take it from me. This place here changes a man.
Oh yeah, in what way?
I used to be white.
That's pretty funny. Let's see what we got here.
You have views where you believe the U.S. government should be overthrown, yet you're relying on the charity of others and potentially the charity of taxpayers.
Guerrilla warfare, man. Guerrilla warfare. You got to take what you have to get what you need. Okay? That's Chairman Mao. I'm sure you don't have any bad words for him.
正义翻身当家做主人，咿呀咿自由，呀呀自由啊！正义翻身当家做主人。天上太阳红呀红彤彤哎，心中的太阳是毛泽东哎，他领导我们一片红哎红。
Oh boy, I do not endorse Adam Waffen at all. I just want to make sure, just in case. Yeah, Chairman Mason. Okay. Yep. Don't worry, I'm not gonna make y'all watch that. Okay. Let's go ahead and hear this.
Interventionist sort of person when it comes to proactive measures to protect our civilization, advance our hegemony in the world, and promote democracy, human rights, and liberalism throughout every corner of the world. And so, at the end of the day, I'd say
the thing is, I mean, I've talked with Kevin twice. You know, the thing is, man, is that he's one of these folks. He's like, well, actually, I mean, if you asked him point blank about what he thought about the My Lai massacre, he'd be like, yeah, that's awful. Or ask him about, Gallagher, the Navy SEAL who went in and just, shot folks randomly and everything else like that, being an absolute shitbag. He'd be like, well, yeah, I'm against that, but, And then, of course, I've seen him backpedal a little bit more, specifically on Iraq, where he's just like, well, Iraq today is it's a much more freer country than it was under Saddam. And it's like, wait a minute. I remember when you typed out a comment and you said that Iran controlled Iraq. Like I say, I think that he's full of shit, generally speaking. I genuinely think he's full of shit. He just wants to try to appeal to folks. But then when you don't have to dig that far underneath the surface just to see that he really doesn't give a shit about, any sort of legitimate internationalism or anything else like that. He just wants that, yeah. But yeah, I'm just saying, I think it's ridiculous, his sort of stances that he's taking. The thing is that if I asked him point blank what he thought about the popular mobilization forces in Iraq being stronger than the actual military, he'd be like, oh, well, So, like I say, I just think he's full of shit. But yeah, let's continue.
I'm a liberal with offensive realist characteristics in that sense.
Interesting. Okay. Well, feeling that there's going to be a lot of people that might want to. You probably would be able to debate people on the left and the right then, huh?
That's correct. Yeah, on my channel, Superpower Broadcasting, I have a playlist of debates comprising roughly 35 to 40 debates so far since I became a Debate Me Bro. And it was only last year that I became a Debate Me Bro. I used to...
The thing is, you know what? Let's go ahead and skip ahead a little bit here because I don't feel like getting into all this. I don't care about this self-promotion that he's doing. Whoop-de-whoop.
British, anti-Western, anti-NATO within.
The thing is that he'll say the thing is that he'll criticize the Brits because ultimately the Brits are going to work with the Taliban. Like I say, he's even said the same thing. Because guess what? The British are wusses at this point. The British aren't worth that much. And the thing is, of course, he'll say that the British were being authoritarian towards groups like Ergun, this and that. So he's just, yeah. I don't even know what to say about it. I can't really take him that seriously. Eventually, I think he's going to get owned by somebody, and it's just,
coincide. And so for me, I recognize that the Cold War is the biggest long-term pressing issue, that we need to get tough on China and we need to get tough on Russia. But those countries also possess vast nuclear arsenals, and they can't be dealt with.
See, it's amazing to me that he'll be like, oh, well, that, nuclear arsenal. It's like I think he's genuinely obsessed with like A-bombs and all this sort of thing. I remember that he had a stream where he was just showing like A-bomb explosions, this and that. It's like the guy's obsessed with it. The thing is that what he ignores is the fact that China produces most of the world's semiconductors used in electronics. So how are you going to stop that, man? I don't see that happening unless, that you're going to make the U.S. spend billions of dollars producing these plants across the West Coast or across the country. It's like, bruh, I don't see that happening. So I don't know, but yeah.
Simply by conventional sort of invasion. And so we need to think of creative means. And I talk about creative ways to win against them without having to do a war over on my channel, Superpower Broadcasting.
He doesn't. He does not. He does not have any way like that. No, I mean, what sort of creative ways is he talking about? It's like, I've listened to a fair amount of his shit. He's not talking about any creative ways to take on China. No, because there isn't any. Other than trying to get, the Anglophone countries like New Zealand and Australia to, ban China, or whatever the case may be. It's like, if I ask him point blank, it's like, oh, should we have like more yellow peril where we should keep Chinese students out of the U.S.? And he'd probably be like, oh, no, that's racist and that's evil nationalism. And of course, he's one of these folks, oh, nationalism bad. But we want to promote American hegemony. It's just like, you can't, like I say, you're at odds with yourself, but yeah. I don't know. That's my opinion on it, but yeah.
It relates to smaller issues, though pressing nonetheless, North Korea and Iran being particular ones. I advocate for outright intervention there because we've tried everything else and it simply hasn't worked, particularly in the case of North Korea, where North Korea...
Nobody's going to go into North Korea. I mean, if you think that they wouldn't use some sort of dirty bomb or anything else like that, you're kidding yourself. In Iran is a hugely mountainous country where I imagine, IRGC and everything else, those, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, those folks will hide in the mountains for months at a time, possibly years at a time, So I don't know, man. I just, like I say, on a practical level, I think that this is all bullshit. They're not going to do that. The U.S. doesn't have the stomach for it.
Well, come to the negotiating table. They'll come to the six-party talks. They'll come to various fora, and they'll strike terms of agreement, and then they'll betray all of that. They'll brag about it afterwards, and then they'll build up more nukes or do more belligerent action.
Oh, please. If we want to look at it that way, it's like the U.S. has broken plenty of pledges, so who cares?
And then they'll brag about it, and then the West will come back and say, okay, well, what can we do? What more can we give you for peace? And they'll say, oh, well, give us this stuff. And then they just betray the terms of the deal and get more nuclear weapons. So the obvious conclusion there is that we're at the last resort in their case.
And then you could say, well, the U.S. wasn't part of the Paris Climate Accord, so who cares? So what the fuck is that point anyway?
Where they get so many that they can blackmail America and take South Korea in a 1v1.
Let me see what these comments are.
And America won't do anything because that would be the end of American hegemony if North Korea succeeds against South Korea. NATO would fall apart after that if we find out that you can do nuclear blackmail against America and succeed. Additionally, on Iran, Iran is currently engaged in many wars throughout the Middle East. They're waging an empire of blood, basically, and they must be dealt with as well before they acquire a nuclear weapon. They may already have a crude fissile, probably gun-type uranium device, and that would be problematic enough. But to see them build up a nuclear arsenal, they would probably be the most likely to actively use it. And so we have to deal with them before that situation gets out of hand. So those are the big issues that I talk about, but I also would support intervention in Syria. It's just, and as well as in Venezuela, but those are purely at at the time being humanitarian concerns. And in my view, security concerns must take precedence, because if you're nuked, you can't look after anyone else. You have to deal with the threats to you first and foremost, and then you can talk about helping other people that don't pose a nuclear threat.
Let me go ahead and read this. Let me go ahead and explain this a little bit here. I doubt he supports BLM. He doesn't support BLM. He is very much against it. He'll say that BLM is actually supported by Russia. He says, well, BLM gets money from Russia. I mean, literally conspiracy theorist type shit, where it's like, oh, it's, Soviet Union. Yeah, wokeism is not liberalism. In fact, it's more common with the hysteria of fascism and communism. Oh, boy. Ordo-liberal. Yeah, exactly. You're essentially a communist. The type of society you promote has more in common with communist states. This is why you sent me this video. Oh, okay. You're a commie because you're a fascist. That's it. You're a right-wing commie. Oh, wow. By the way, I think America should return to a confederal republic based on regionalism rather than uber-centralized mass surveillance state. Commies say the same thing? Huh? They just say they want workers' control of the means of production to give power to regional workers' councils / Soviets. P.S. Communism is the original populism. All populism is trash and essentially communism, i.e. Huey Long claims he was an anti-communist, yet he was very basically a communist. He all about poor workers, wealth redistribution. Hold on. Oh, my goodness. Hold on. Wealth redistribution, state spending, thought the New Deal was not radical enough and used illegal dictatorial methods to achieve his aims. Well, the thing is that oil companies were very much fighting against him. The traditional powers that be, whether they're Cajun or whatever else, fought against him. So, I mean, I guess if you want to suck the dick of gas companies back then, oil companies, go ahead, I guess. But, yeah. Many commies love Huey Long, so that's more proof of you being a commie regardless of your aesthetics, preferences, cell phone, I guess. Hold on. So what would you say about his son, Russell Long, who supported, the earned income tax credit? That primarily comes from Russell Long, his son. He controlled a lot of the finance. He was in charge of the finance committee on the Senate. So, I mean, okay, like I said, I guess I'm coping, but it's like, are you kidding me? It's pitiful to argue about folks like that. Yeah. I chose it because it looks cool and because I play, okay. HOI 4. He was anti-communist and literally a feudal aristocrat. Blah, blah, blah. Typical commie going on about the ruling elites being evil and not you not being a loser. You should be open. You should be shown open disdain. America is still an English-inspired constitutional liberal polity. Polity? We have Democrats and Republicans. That's not much of a polity. America still has English as the main language. It depends on where you go in America. Okay. What corrupted vestiges of Anglo foundation are you talking about? It's people like you who want to erase all of that and replace it with non-Western illiberal system like in Russia and China. Oh, wow. America has been improving on its foundation, constantly striving for more freedom and security of its citizens. Hold on. Whoa. Constantly striving for more freedom and security. This almost sounds like this literally sounds like double talk right here. Freedom and security. It's striving for more security over people. You mean like censorship and getting people arrested over what they say? I do agree that it's hyper-individualism that allowed mentally ill social rejects like you to become conspiratorial commies / Nazis. America should reopen asylums and invest. Hold on. Reagan closed the asylums. So, I mean, you would say based Reagan, right? Reopen asylums and invest in community building. Hold on. So you want community building, but wouldn't that be a form of socialism? so losers don't end up on 4chan. Oh my goodness. This guy just wants to make, oh my goodness. Next he's going to say you live in a basement, right? Crying about not having GFs and blaming people of other races for their personal problems. Oh boy. Okay. Okay, commie, go back to decrying about Western liberal democracy while you benefit from it. Typical privileged commie promoting authoritarianism when he never experienced it. I know who the Mad Baron is. Unlike you, I'm not historically illiterate, and I didn't learn about him from a video game, lol. Another irony is you people being always losers who waste your time playing video games and watching cartoons. When in the type of societies you promote, you would be beaten and sent to prison for it. I kind of agree with that policy, to be honest. But yes, Ungern was anti-communist, as in he opposed the Bolsheviks gaining power and placing the aristocracy he was part of as a ruling class, but he was just as authoritarian and liberal as them. Oh, wow. Oh, this is horseshoe theory now. Okay. And not be replaced by a new Bolshevik one. That's it. Most commies with Stalin PFPs also say they are not Stalin supporters. They just think he was an interesting historical figure and quite the character. You're all cowards, not able to own up to your views. This is literally like Voshism, right? Where because the Nazis that Vosh debates are not, they're cowards because they don't outright say say what they actually mean. They're cowards for that. It's like it's like because they're not fucking retarded and say that. Oh man, no wonder. Yeah, he was quoting what I said in the previous comment. Oh yeah, U.S. promised to vote to all of Vietnam, but Ho Chi Minh was so popular in both the North and South that the U.S. called off the election. Oh yeah. Oh wow. So this is why you sent me that. Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah, bruh, base. Progressivism is anti-liberal. Lol, you're even more of a commie than I thought. I checked your channel, and you actually have entire playlists dedicated to anti-imperialism and socialism, the most failed ideology in history of the world. Haha. Just admit that you're a traitorous commie. Oh, wow. So what? Anyways, good night. Yeah, exactly, yeah. I'm an anti-imperialist, too. That's why I want to destroy fascist Russia and communist China and champion world liberation from tyranny. You're only anti-imperialism when it comes to America, your country. You are pro-imperialism of enemy countries like Russia and China. You don't have to be conscious of this. Just by virtue of opposing American imperialism, you are supporting the imperialism of your country's enemies. That's just how geopolitics works. Someone is going to have to fill the vacuum. You oppose American hegemony, therefore you're anti-American. It's that simple. Third positionism, aka fascism, is just not like other commies' copium. It's nationalistic, social conservative, autocratic socialism, which is what all communist states were in practice anyway, regardless of their preaching of internationalism, social progress, and workers' democracy. There's little practical difference between fascism and communism. The biggest difference is aesthetics. Nosballs know this and are honest about it. Well, it's a good thing I call myself a nosball. The thing is that I've also seen Kevin still cope about the fact it's like, yeah, Azov Battalion, or neo-Nazis and whatnot, but it's like, well, we probably would have been neo-Nazis. He has literally said this, by the way. Kevin has literally said that he would be a neo-Nazi he would support Ukraine being Nazis in the Second World War to oppose Holodomor in Ukraine. It's just like, what? I just, yeah. Yeah. The interview itself is boring. Yeah, exactly.
Generally, my sort of foreign policy is genocide denial.
Yeah, you know what? I'm done with this. Yeah, I'm done with this. I'm not even going to say cope or anything. I'm just tired of talking about him, to be honest with you. I'm not even going to be like, oh, yes, oh my gosh, he won this and that. It's just that people like him are going to play their mental gymnastics. And it's like, yeah, to a point, I probably play mental gymnastics as well, but at least to a point, I try to be honest about it. Maybe I'm full of shit for saying it like that, but there's a lot of mental gymnastics he has to say, like, well, yeah, the U.S. gave up in Afghanistan, but we're still good it's all just bullshit. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say on that. There are a couple of videos that I could show, but yeah. Who cares about the actual premise of what I was going to say in the video? It doesn't matter at this point. So anyway, hopefully y'all enjoyed this live stream, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, night, wherever you are. So see you later. Goodbye. There you go. See, I'm trying to go back to what I used to say. Anyway, oh, here's a whole Gaelic song about the palate cleanser. Okay, we'll go ahead and do the palate cleanser. All right. I'll do the palate cleanser. All right. Let's go ahead and do it. There we go. We'll do this palate cleanser. All right, here we go.
The